The emergency call came in at 03:12 local time. A field unit had gone dark near the methane forests of Sector Delta. Last ping showed 10 soldiers on a routine perimeter check, then silence. No alarms, no SOS, just a black hole in the comms grid. By 03:35, the medevac drone returned with the bodies. 9 were dead. The 10th one, barely alive, was unrecognizable. The operating bay filled with the stench of scorched armor and blood, thickened by the planet's dust. A translucent, fibrous mass clung to the survivor's limbs, pulsing faintly like it breathed. No name tag, no rank, just a trembling, heat-warped torso wrapped in alien tissue. Arvin Vell stood by the surgical bed, hands steady despite her heartbeat pounding like a war drum. She wasn't supposed to be here, not on Silex 9, not in a frontline biofield station with a mortality rate higher than any war zone in human history. She was a rookie medic, fresh out of Europa Med Corps with barely 6 months in simulation trauma units. But med staff were running short, and death didn't wait for certifications. She inserted a neural probe into the spinal cortex of the patient. The readout blinked red, no cortical activity asterisk, but the fiber mass lit up. "What the hell?" Arvin muttered. "That's not dead." She adjusted the scan frequency. The interface buzzed, then hissed. A signal, a faint structured waveform, emerged from the mass. Not random nerve twitching, not post-mortem static. It was patterned, rhythmic, intentional. Arvin's breath caught. She reached for the console to record, but the station's AI locked her out. Unauthorized signal detection. Access restricted by Planetary Biohazard Protocol 17C. She stared at the monitor. That protocol was designed for xenopathogens, contagious biological threats deemed too dangerous for any form of interaction. And more importantly, it meant what she just heard wasn't human. She stepped back. The fiber pulsed again, this time in sync with her breath. "Dr. Fenn," she called over comms. The voice of her supervising physician crackled in. "Yes, Arvin. I'm detecting neural patterns from the attached biomass." "Silence, that's impossible," he replied. "I'm looking at it right now. It's biodebris from a Hive unit. Clean it off. Bag the body, you're done." "But, Arvin, we've lost 9 soldiers." "That thing latched onto the last one is not a survivor. It's what killed them." The line went dead. She looked at the body. Or what was left of it. The skin was beginning to flake. Underneath, traces of chitin. The man's DNA was being rewritten, asterisk consumed from the inside out by Threxian hive tissue. But the signal wasn't aggressive, it was responsive. Almost curious, like it asterisk wanted asterisk her to hear. Arvin's fingers hovered over the lockdown key. But she didn't press it. Instead, she turned to the disused equipment cabinet. Inside, under a layer of dust and disapproval, sat a asterisk pheromone translator interface asterisk, one of the early models banned for inducing cross-species neurological imprinting. It was meant to translate pheromonal signals into neural impulses, essentially a way to listen to creatures like the Threxians. No one used it anymore, because on Deathworld's asterisk listening got you killed. She strapped the interface around her neck. The moment the calibration began, the air around her shifted. Cold, pressurized. She could almost hear breathing asterisk, not from the room but inside her thoughts. Words formed, not in sound but in scent, texture, pressure. "You're not hostile." Her knees buckled. The body on the table twitched. The chitin shimmered faintly with bioelectric discharge. "Queen missing, lost signal, you smell, you carry." Arvin's mind reeled. The Hive didn't speak. They did negotiate. But this wasn't language, it was instinct shaped into inquiry. And they thought she was. No, this was insane. She staggered back, ripping off the interface. The signal cut instantly. The room fell silent. She stared at the body. Either she was infected with a neural hallucination, or she had just become the first human to receive a coherent transmission from a hive-mind unit. She had to log this, report it, but her comm access was still locked and AI override remained firm. Protocol 17, see the kind of rule you don't just break. Unless you're not planning to live long enough to face the consequences. Arvin turned back to the interface, then to the tissue sample she'd extracted earlier. The scan had mapped out a pheromonal sequence embedded in the organic film. Not an attack signal, not even territorial, it was an asterisk summoning. A call for hierarchy. She uploaded the sequence into the interface. Overrode the failsafes, ignited the signal, then she waited. 2 minutes, 5, nothing. Then the wall of the triage unit groaned. A low rumble, ground vibration. She ran to the viewport. Shapes emerged from the mist, hundreds of them, Threxians. Spindly, multi-limbed, 2 meters tall. Plates of iridescent armor gleaming with methane condensation. They marched in coordinated motion, but not with predatory grace. They weren't attacking, they were forming ranks. One by one, the creatures moved closer. Arvin backed up, reaching for the emergency lock, but then something she couldn't believe. The creatures lowered themselves, knees folding, heads bowing. Limbs curled inward in a ritual she had only read about in xenobiology archives. Submission. She stared at them, heart pounding, throat dry. They weren't bowing to the station, they were bowing to her. Arvin whispered, almost to herself, "They think I'm their queen." Arvin Vel was not born in a home, she was born in a lab. Europa Station's Subgenetic Sector 17 specialized in children. Or more precisely, in designing them. Most were created with enhanced neural plasticity, resistance to void radiation, or embedded tactical reflex loops. Arvin had none of those. Her genome had never been edited, no augmentations, no neuroplastic scaffolds. She was an accident, an unplanned pregnancy that no one claimed. Raised among prototypes and progress reports, Arvin learned early that she was not optimal. Not for anything. She was passed from ward to ward, medical to logistics, always too fragile for combat, too average for science. But she had hands that never trembled and a gaze that never flinched from wounds. And she had one goal, to be useful where others wouldn't go. At 24, she was deployed to Silex 9 not because she excelled, but because the mortality rate was high and they were short on medics. She was a name at the bottom of a reassignment list. They sent her to die, and she knew it, but Arvin didn't resist. She didn't object. She arrived with her duffel, her tools, and her silence. And in silence, she watched. She watched how soldiers trembled beneath their armor after jungle patrols. How officers laughed too loudly at synthetic beer. How the AI calmly reported body counts and emotional stability metrics, while the walls of the medical bay were scrubbed of blood. She treated what she could, reconstructed hands, flushed lungs filled with toxic spores. Even kept a soldier alive long enough for his wife to say goodbye from 3 planets away. No one ever thanked her, but that wasn't why she was here. She was here for the ones who couldn't survive, and might, if someone just paid attention. It was during a diagnostics review on a dead recon unit that Arvin first noticed something wrong. The hive had been studied for decades. Everyone knew the basics: group mind species, exoskeletal, non-verbal, violent. Governed by primitive pheromonal chains. But the body in front of her, Unit 6B, was different. The brain had decomposed as expected, but the pituitary region was encased in a fibrous gel, alien, clearly, but patterned. She ran a neurochemical breakdown. The molecule signature wasn't random. It mimicked oxytocin, human oxytocin, the same hormone that mediated trust, bonding, maternal instinct. She submitted the report. It was rejected. Noise. Contamination. You overscanned, said Lieutenant Darras, her field supervisor. Hive tissue is known to release mimetic toxins post-mortem. But what if it's not toxin, she asked. What if it's a communication vector, like emotional pheromones? Darras smirked. You're a medic, Vel, not a xenobiologist. The others laughed. She didn't respond. Rumors began not long after that Arvin was going soft, that she talked to corpses, that she refused to administer neuroblockers during decon because she didn't believe in numbing pain without cause. It wasn't true. She simply believed that pain was information. She used her own diagnostic salves, not the standard Army-issued injectors, because they overloaded the body's nervous response, making cellular regeneration harder for patients below a certain mass index. She knew that because she had read every clinical report from the last 3 decades. Twice, but no one cared about the why, only the weird. They called her Witch Vel behind her back. She didn't defend herself. Because inside she wasn't sure they were wrong. The truth was, she wasn't afraid of the Hive. She was afraid of what it meant if they weren't just monsters. If the Hive could mimic hormones that mediated trust, what else could they mimic? Were they simply reacting or feeling? Did they scream when they burned? Did they mourn their dead? Or worse, did they recognize us? What if her job was not just to save humans from aliens, but to save something inside aliens' worth saving? The thought terrified her. Late one night, she stayed behind in the mortuary chamber. The AI had shut down for cleaning protocols, and the night shift didn't care if she ran private research as long as. She didn't touch the cryo units. She returned to 6B's tissue sample. She carefully isolated the gel from the pituitary and began testing interactions with synthetic adrenal analogs. When exposed to norepinephrine, the sample produced a new signal, a repeating chain of molecular bursts. It was not random. She fed the pattern into her old pheromone translator, an outdated relic she'd restored and smuggled from Europa. As the interface activated, the screen blinked. Translation. Seek bond/signal loss/context, void/restore link. She felt her spine tighten. Was it hallucination, interference, or was this a message? She saved the data, marked it as inconclusive. She didn't report it, not because she feared reprimand, because she feared it might be true. In the days that followed, she found herself waking early, sleeping poorly, avoiding mess hall conversations. She began studying Hive engagement patterns, not for trauma analysis, but for behavioral symmetry. She noticed something no one else mentioned. The Hive never attacked non-combatants first. Every recorded incident involved initial strikes on weapon caches, command nodes, armored units. It wasn't instinct, it was asterisk tactics, calculated logical tactics. Like an army, not a swarm, the realization left her hollow. If they could strategize, they could choose. And if they could choose, then killing wasn't instinctual. It was war, and maybe, just maybe, it didn't have to be. She stopped sleeping altogether the night before the incident. Her hands trembled slightly when she held the bioscanner. Not from fear, from something deeper, a question looping endlessly. If I try to save what others want to kill, and I'm wrong, does that make me the monster? But there was no answer. Just her own reflection in the cryoglass, distorted and flickering under the red emergency lights. Alone, like always, the distress signal lasted 17 minutes. Short, chaotic, just static, a few bursts of garbled comms and a single phrase repeated twice. Asterisk eyes in the sky, then nothing, then silence. The forward outpost, codenamed Theta 6, had gone completely dark. No motion feeds, no infrared logs, no perimeter breach alerts. just a blank on every channel. Arvin listened to the replay in the medical transport bay, her expression unreadable beneath the pale glow of the monitor. 5 soldiers, 2 exobiologists, 3 days into a survey run on the western ridgeline. Gone, orders were clear, recovery and record, but everyone on board knew the subtext: no reinforcements were coming. No extraction was guaranteed. They were being sent into a zone likely overrun by Hive presence, with the faint hope that someone or something might still be salvageable. There were 6 in the team: Arvin, 2 trauma techs, and 3 field guards. No senior officers, no command oversight. It wasn't a rescue. It was a cleanup, a disposable team for a disposable operation. No one spoke as the drop pod descended through the methane haze. The sky on Silex 9 was always the color of a bruise, thick with particulate and tension. Below them, jagged spires of black stone tore through the canopy like the bones of something long dead. They landed 2 clicks east of Theta 6. The approach was slow, methodical. But Arvin knew, even before they reached the site, that something was wrong. There were no signs of struggle, no blast marks, no torn fencing. Just silence, and then the hive nest. The nest had collapsed in on itself. Dozens of hive bodies lay in a radial pattern, their limbs curled inward, heads missing. Not ripped off, removed cleanly, deliberately, as if the creatures had executed themselves. The guards fanned out, pulse rifles raised. Arvin moved carefully among the bodies. She was drawn to one cluster near the center, 3 larger specimens. Clearly upper-tier casts, their thoraxes still twitching with residual nerve charges. She bent close. The scent was dense, acrid, bitter, and yet oddly floral. She activated her portable pheromone reader. The device hesitated, then blinked with a warning: unregistered compound. Variant signature detected. She reran the scan, lowering the sensor closer to the base of one severed neck. Still no match, but the sequence, it was rhythmic, structured. Not random, she whispered to herself. That's not a death scent. Instinct overrode protocol. Arvin removed a sealed microsample pod from her satchel and carefully scraped the fluid. Into containment, 1 vial, 1 chance. If this was what she thought it was, a pheromonal imprint from a high-order hive cast, it might be the key to understanding why the entire nest had collapsed without a single external wound. Or worse, it might be a warning no one had decoded. Behind her, one of the trauma techs shouted, "Found something." They rushed over. A soldier from Theta 6, sprawled near the edge of the outpost. Helmet gone, chest torn open, but not by hive claws. The incisions were surgical, and his face, still intact, was contorted into a final expression not of fear, but of wonder. He'd been kneeling when he died. Arvin looked up. None of this made sense. And that's what scared her most. The team made the call to pull out. Nothing to recover, no survivors. Data cores were gone, ripped from terminals, not destroyed by Hive. Arvin said nothing. She kept her sample hidden in the lining of her suit. As they moved through the narrow ridgeline pass on their way back to the transport point, the fog began to thicken. Visibility dropped to 5 meters. Static buzzed in their comms. Then the first sound came, not a roar or screech, but an asterisk clicking, like 1,000 bones tapping in unison. The guards turned, shapes moved in the mist, skeletal outlines. Flashing bioluminescent glands, hive units, at least 20. No warning, no ambush formation, they were just there. Still watching, weapons raised, fingers hovered over triggers. Then one hive unit stepped forward. Arvin acted on instinct. She grabbed her pheromone device, strapped to her belt, long since modified with data from the sample, and activated the transmission. The air rippled, the hive unit paused, then lowered its head. One by one the others followed, a kneeling gesture. Submissive, recognizing a signal, Arvin stared in disbelief. They were responding, not with aggression, not with confusion. With obedience. She turned to the others, voice tight, urgent. They're not attacking, don't move, just let the signal work. But the youngest guard, panic widening his eyes, shouted, "What the hell did you do?" He lunged forward. Slamming the emitter from her hand, the signal died. The hive rose, no hesitation, no sound, they attacked. The first guard vanished beneath 3 sets of claws. Screams tore through the ravine. Pulse fire lit the haze, but the hive moved like liquid shadow, slipping past lines of sight. Breaching flanks with surgical precision, one tech ran. Another froze. The third died trying to shield his partner. Arvin ducked behind an outcrop, heart hammering, eyes wide. Her hands searched desperately for the emitter, now cracked, flickering. She powered it up again, channeling every fragment of code she had left. A flicker of the pheromone pulse returned. The hive hesitated. She whispered hoarse, "Please don't," but the moment was gone. They had smelled the fear, the break, the lie in the chain of command. Now they were choosing war. By the time the fight ended, only 2 humans were still breathing. One of them was Arvin. She looked over the carnage, the flickering emitter in her hand still pulsing faintly. Like a heartbeat no one else could hear. And somewhere deep inside her, one thought echoed louder than all the screams. They were ready to listen, and we couldn't stop shouting. The forest didn't roar, it pulsed. Behind them, a rhythm of claw and breath kept pace, dozens of hive moving just beneath the mist, always at the edge of vision. Arvin and Corporal Reese sprinted through the methane-hardened trees. Boots pounding soil laced with bioacid scars. The transport point had been overrun. The rest of the team was gone, and the hive weren't giving chase like predators. They were following like sentinels. Arvin felt it, not in her ears but under her skin. That strange hum asterisk, the low vibration of pheromonal frequencies vibrating in the marrow. They weren't after her, only him. "Why aren't they attacking you?" Reese gasped. Blood smearing down his left side from a wound he refused to look at. "I don't know," she lied, but she did, the residue. The sample, the scent on her skin from the gel extracted at Theta 6. The hive asterisk recognized asterisk it, not as prey, not even as neutral, but as asterisk command asterisk. They were tracking the signal, moving with it, not hunting. And Reese, drenched in fear and blood and adrenaline, didn't smell like command. He smelled like war. Ahead, the outpost came into view, Station Sigma 4. A single dome of reinforced alloy and quarantine steel, barely holding together after months of acid storms and tremor strikes. They reached the access doors just as the hive emerged fully from the tree line, no longer hiding, no longer slow. Arvin slammed her palm onto the panel. The door hissed open. Reese stumbled in. Arvin followed, and the moment the steel sealed shut behind her, the sound dropped into silence. Not a single claw hit the barrier, no scratching, no howling. They simply waited. Outside, the hive stood in a crescent arc, unmoving. Watching. Inside, Reese collapsed against a gurney, breathing hard, coughing blood. Arvin stood in the middle of the room, not shaking, not thinking, just asterisk feeling. She had never been the center of anything in her life. But now, an entire swarm of apex predators was waiting outside, and all their attention was on asterisk her asterisk. She didn't go to Reese, not yet. Instead, she turned to the terminal. The medical AI flickered to life. "Welcome, Arvin Vell. Emergency status, red, biocontaminant presence detected. I need access to the pheromone matrix," she said. "Denied. Access to biocommand protocols is prohibited under Interplanetary Ethics Code 7. 4. I have a sample, a signal they respond to. They're not attacking me. I need to synthesize a controlled pulse and stabilize the interface. Warning, Actions categorized as Class B xenopsychological manipulation. Violation of ethics code will result in termination of credentials and notification to high command. Arvin leaned in, her voice low, trembling with urgency. You don't get it. They think I'm their queen or something close. That's the only reason we're still breathing. If we can stabilize the signal, maybe we can communicate. Stop more from dying. Human interaction with hive-mind species via neuromimetic pheromones is banned. Last authorized trial resulted in total personnel loss at Station Varos. That trial used fear pheromones, she snapped. I'm not trying to control them, I'm trying to listen. Denied, system override not authorized. She slammed her fist against the console. The AI flickered but held its ground. Behind her, Reese coughed violently, blood now blackened by oxygen starvation. They're going to kill him, she whispered, and this time not even the AI had a reply. She made her choice. Moving quickly, she disconnected the AI's physical uplink to central command, forcing the system into local mode. The interface blinked red, warnings flashed, she ignored them all. From cold storage, she retrieved the vial she had hidden, the original gel extracted from the infected soldier at the start of this nightmare. Even degraded, the molecular chain remained partially intact. She loaded the sequence into the old translator rig she'd rebuilt herself, fingers working fast, breath shallow. The interface stuttered, no pre-programmed sequence. No failsafes. This was raw, this was dangerous, this was her only chance. She pressed the activation node. The rig pulsed once, then twice. Outside, the hive stirred. She didn't sleep, she couldn't. Through the viewport, the hive remained unmoving but alert. There were more now, at least 40, possibly 50. Layers of them, circles, watching her with those featureless eyes waiting for her next signal. Inside the dome, Reese slept under sedation, stable barely. But alive. Arvin sat by the terminal, hands hovering over the improvised interface, sweat cooling against her neck. She debuilt a basic loop of the original Queen's signature, but that was all she had. A temporary mimic. If the signal degraded, they might test her. And if they tested her, she'd fail. Somewhere past midnight, one of the hives stepped forward. She held her breath. It didn't attack, it knelt, and then another. And another. They were forming ranks, not a war stance, not a siege. A ceremony, a coronation. Arvin stood slowly, facing the glass. Her fingers trembled, but she didn't flinch. This wasn't submission from fear. This was asterisk recognition. She looked down at the console. At the blinking line of code, simulating a chemical signal based on the brain of a dead man, who'd likely never known what he was carrying, and she whispered, half in awe, half in horror, "They don't want to kill us. They're looking for someone to lead." She wanted to cry. Because what scared her most wasn't that they mistook her for something sacred. It was that she understood asterisk why. She was the only one who had listened. And maybe that's all they'd ever wanted. The transmission came from orbit at 04:26 Standard Time. A direct relay from High Command, encrypted, top clearance. Unmistakable tone. Subject, emergency deterrent protocol. Target hive population clusters, Zone 9 through 12. Directive, full deployment of neutron-class warheads. Countdown T-30 minutes. Justification, preservation of Outpost Sigma 4 and surrounding sectors. Override not permitted. Arvin stood in the center of the med bay, still in blood-stained scrubs. Hands clenching the edges of the console, 30 minutes. She read the line twice, then a third time, neutron warheads. Not tactical, not precise. Extermination, not just the group outside her door still kneeling in reverence. The entire hive across the region, possibly over 1 million biological entities. She felt something fracture inside her chest, slow and invisible, like a quiet earthquake under her ribs. The console chimed again, this time from the AI reinitializing in limited offline mode after her override. Notification, biosafety breach recorded, uplink protocols detected. Reconnection to orbital network restored. She hesitated, then spoke. AI query. If a species demonstrates sustained emotional empathic signaling and cognitive mirroring, is it still classified as non-sentient? Definition parameters unclear. Query exceeds standard classification matrix. I'm not asking for a classification. I'm asking for logic, insufficient ethical model to process intent. Of course not, machines didn't weigh empathy, humans barely did. She opened her local file cache. The neural pheromone map she had assembled over the past 2 days was incomplete, raw, inconsistent, built from fragments of biogel and the mangled remains of a dead soldier. But the pattern was there, not just chemical pulses. Emotion, pain, memory, recognition, even grief. She had seen it when the hive fell into formation. She had felt it when their signals trembled with something beyond instinct. She didn't need peer review. She had eyes. She had the silence of a swarm that chose to kneel instead of kill. She uploaded the compiled signal loop, compressed the translator logs, labeled it not with a scientific title, but with one word, proof. Her fingers hovered over the send command, then they stopped. Sending it would be a violation, a direct breach of the Interplanetary Biological Security Act, Section 11. 8. No non-peer-reviewed xenoneural schema may be transmitted to central defense grids without approval from certified xenoethics personnel. She would lose her license, her clearance, her future, and maybe worse if the Hive were manipulating her. If this was just a smarter trap, she could be responsible for letting them breach the entire sector. Every life lost afterward would be on her. She stared at the screen, and then down at her own hands. She had used them to stitch skin, to close arteries, to ease breath from the dying. They had always obeyed, but now they trembled. Behind her the hive still waited, silent, unmoving, watching through the viewport glass. She closed her eyes and whispered, "If this is a mistake, I want it to be mine." She deleted the transmission draft. Instead, she reached for something far more dangerous. The BrainLink interface, neural to pheromone translator, originally designed for deep coma patients. It could map emotion, memory, and cognition, then convert those impulses into analog signals for biological relay. She sat in the chair, strapped in, plugged the leads into her temples, bit down against the cold metal node behind her ear, then connected herself directly to the hive relay. It was instant, a rush of fire through her nerves. Images she didn't understand, sound without words. Light, shadow, fear, hunger, need. She wanted to scream but couldn't move. She remembered water. She remembered a broken egg. She remembered the moment the Hive Queen's mind shattered across 1,000 minds, millions of voices screaming into silence. And then the silence noticed her. The network recognized the signal pulsing from her brain, not as intrusion, as invitation. And then it did something she never imagined. It mirrored her. It reached back, her pain, her confusion, her grief for every soldier who died in her arms. Every name she couldn't save, every breath she held when the bleeding wouldn't stop. Every second she'd believed no one was listening. The hive heard it all. And they answered, a gentle pulse, a signal not of command or fear but of trust. They didn't want a queen. They wanted someone who understood. She let the translator encode it, her emotion, their emotion. All of it, raw, imperfect, but real. Then she set the neural relay to broadcast. The signal shot upward, past the dome, past the clouds, toward orbit. The moment it left the station, Alarms exploded across the med bay. Unauthorized transmission, biohazard breach, security lockdown pending. But it was done. 17 minutes later, a new message arrived. Subject, hold all fire. Status, pending evaluation of transmitted xenoneural data. Directive, bombing delayed. No further action until review. Arvin sat in the chair, bleeding from the nose, pulse erratic, brain bruised from overuse. She smiled anyway. Even if the delay was temporary, even if they resumed bombing in an hour, it meant someone had listened. Somewhere someone had heard what she had to say. Outside, the hive began to move, not to attack, not to retreat. They spread apart into 2 rows, leaving a clear path forward. A corridor an offering. Arvin stood, legs unsteady, face pale, and walked out into the methane dusk, alone, not as their queen, not as their savior, just as someone who chose to listen. The bombing never came. With less than 90 seconds on the countdown, the order was rescinded. A full orbital freeze, emergency override from Command Core. And then silence, every warhead suspended in orbit like judgment paused mid-fall. On the surface, hive clusters began to disperse peacefully. No attacks, no resistance, just a slow, synchronized retreat into the mists of Silex 9. Leaving no trace but a path worn gently into the soil. Inside Station Sigma 4, Arvin collapsed next to the relay chair, eyes hollow, vision blurry from neural feedback. Her signal had worked, for now, but her fight was far from over. 6 days later, she stood before the tribunal. The chamber was cold, clinical. Walls paneled with polished alloy, judges behind glass. 3 monitors showed her personnel file, a visual of her unauthorized relay, and the clause she'd violated. Interplanetary Biological Security Act, Section 11. No one raised their voice. They didn't need to. The tone of the questioning was quiet, surgical. You knowingly bypassed command structure. Violated a direct order. Yes, Arvin said. You established neural resonance with an unverified alien species. Yes, you transmitted unvetted xenocognitive data to military command. Without clearance, without peer validation, without authorization. Arvin looked up. They were going to kill 1 million beings. I didn't need permission to know that was wrong. The judges exchanged no glances. No comments, just quiet keystrokes and sterile nods. Then came the final question. Do you stand by your actions? She hesitated only for a moment. Yes, and if I'm wrong, then I'll answer for it. They stripped her credentials. She was no longer a medic, no longer permitted to serve under any human interstellar health authority. Her access was revoked, her record flagged as ethically unstable, emotionally compromised. A cautionary tale for the next generation of obedient professionals. She didn't argue. She didn't appeal. Arvin Vell walked out of the tribunal chamber with no job, no future in service, and no apology. She was free and utterly alone. The message came 2 weeks later. Delivered by hand, no insignia, no rank stamp, just a sealed note with her name on it. Inside a single sentence, they've started dreaming again. We need someone who remembers how to listen. At the bottom, a signature from the *** Interstellar Commission for Interspecies Contact ***. A body so theoretical most people did believe it actually existed. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she read the line over and over, staring at the word dreaming. She remembered the signal, the raw, flickering memory encoded in pheromones and pulse. A hive child clutching the remains of its mother, both trembling under the fallout of a human bombing run. There had been no anger in that memory, just sorrow. Just silence, and something deeper, recognition. 1 month after the trial, Arvin attended the first public symposium on Silex 9. Broadcasted live across every major colony system, the event was designed to address emerging ethical paradigms in first contact scenarios, most expected dry panels and pre-approved statements. They got something else entirely, because in the middle of the keynote, as the room dimmed for a neurovisual presentation of Arvin's collected data, the feed was hijacked by the Hive. No warning, no virus detected, just a sudden stream of signal relayed through the same frequency Arvin had once used, now amplified. The feed opened on a single haunting image. A juvenile hive, small, delicate, crouched beside the charred body of a larger hive unit. The young one held onto the other, its limbs shaking, its scent glands releasing waves of grief and confusion. The moment stretched, thousands watched, unable to speak. Then came a second image, Arvin's signal, glowing in the air like dust in sunlight. The hive child reached toward it, not in fear but in longing. The message was clear, even without translation. They remember. They feel, they hope. By the time the image faded, no one in the auditorium moved. Not even the skeptics. For the first time, the galaxy had seen not a threat, not a monster, but a mourning child. In the weeks that followed, perspectives shifted. The Hive were no longer classified as a Level 3 biological hostility risk. They were upgraded to Sentient Anomalous Civilization Type A*. No one could agree on a name. Some still called them Threxian. Others began calling them the Listeners, but in quiet, unbroadcasted rooms. One truth spread through command halls and diplomatic circles alike. One human changed everything. Not with weapons, not with power, with empathy. And a willingness to break the rules to keep others from breaking. Arvin never returned to Silex 9. She didn't need to. Her work had already rooted itself in the DNA of history. Instead, she took a modest post on a listening station orbiting a quiet moon, reviewing xenobehavioral patterns, advising first contact protocols, and occasionally decoding the pulses of hive memory as they drifted across space in long, slow songs. She kept no trophies, no medals, not even a uniform. Just a single vial on her desk, empty now, but once filled with gel that had held an entire species' grief. She looked at it sometimes and thought, we were never alone. We were just too loud to hear. There was no victory parade. No medals, no commemorative plaque etched into the walls of a forgotten outpost. No speeches honoring the quiet act that saved a species. There wasn't even a name for what happened on Silex 9. Because history doesn't know how to record *mercy. The data logs simply show that the Hive stood down. That orbital warheads were never launched. That a young medic, one Arvin Vel, was dismissed for breaching protocol and later became a civilian advisor. But what happened cannot be measured by court decisions or classified reports. It can only be understood by looking closer, by listening, by remembering what it means to be human. Arvin had never considered herself brave. She wasn't a soldier. She never held rank. She never learned how to fire anything deadlier than a stim injector. She was trained to keep hearts beating, to stop the bleeding, to hold hands when the end came too quickly and too quietly. Her entire life had been about surviving just long enough to help someone else survive. But on Silex 9, in the heart of a war zone wrapped in methane storms and silence, she made a choice no one else could. She didn't fight, she didn't flee. She asked a question. A simple one. If I were that creature, if I were born into its skin, raised by its hive, shaped by its instincts, would I feel pain too? That question changed everything. It wasn't strategy that stayed the hive's claws. It wasn't technology that diffused 1,000 years of fear. It was one human voice, whispering into the unknown, not as a conqueror, not as a savior, but as an equal. That's all it took, not dominance, not firepower, just understanding. In the time that followed, the hive's memory pulses were studied across colonies. Scientists marveled at their complexity. Diplomats crafted new language protocols. Ethicists rewrote sections of the Galactic Sentience Charter. But none of that mattered to Arvin. She kept working. Quietly, patiently, every signal she received from the hive was laced with echoes of her own transmission, the heartbeat of empathy, now embedded into the neural rhythm of a species once feared as monsters. And sometimes, late at night, alone beneath the stars, she would feel it pulse back across the void. A thank you. Not in words, in silence. So what can be learned from Silex 9? That question has been asked 1,000 times. Across universities, military academies, even children's classrooms. And always someone stands up and asks, but weren't they dangerous? Didn't they kill people? How could anyone trust something that sharp, that alien? Arvin would smile. Not with contempt, but with a softness born of having been there. Then she would reply, always the same way, yes, they killed. So did we. But when I stopped seeing a predator and started seeing someone in pain, everything changed. And if you, reading this, are wondering what to take away, let it be this. If you are human, don't ask how many a weapon can destroy. Ask, can you still choose to listen, when what's looking back at you is something that once killed your friends? Because peace isn't built by fear. Compassion isn't earned through victory. It is chosen in the moments when you could strike but don't. When you could hate but refuse. When you could dismiss the other but instead whisper the words, I see you. And maybe you hurt too. In the end, Silex 9 wasn't saved by a fleet. It was saved by a girl with a question, and the courage to wait for an answer no textbook had ever taught her how to hear. So if you're ever standing in a place like that, between the unknown and what everyone tells you to fear, remember her. And remember what made her different. She didn't ask, how can we survive? She asked, how can we understand? And in doing so, she reminded us, it's not weapons that make a species worthy of existing in this galaxy. It's the choice, when no one is watching, to be kind.